Good morning, friends. And no, I still don't know what the actual costume is that they're talking about. People ask me all the time, but we don't know that. On the edge of our seats, my name is Adam Baker, and I am the site pastor here at Webster. I'm really glad to be with you. I was gone this past weekend down to a music festival called Furnace Fest, which takes place in Alabama, and I was able to watch some bands that I have loved for 30 years. It was a blast. It was wonderful. But my favorite part of that experience was the conversations that I was able to have with a lot of different people. Some people came to me because they know that I'm a pastor. Others found that out along the way as we were talking. But whoever I was speaking with, kind of similar themes kept popping up in the conversations we were having, whether it was because of politics or gender identity and sexuality or the ways in which the church wasn't a stable or safe place for them anymore. So many people just expressed how they felt confused. Now, this is an important clarifying thing. They were not confused about themselves and who they were. They felt safe to be there in that space openly as who they are. Instead, they were talking about feeling confused about how to interact with the other people in their lives, those outside of the festival, the folks back home. And that meant old friends or family members, coworkers, maybe former church connections, basically anyone who was holding very different opinions from them when it came to what matters to them. Every person, and this is consistent across the board, they wanted to talk about the biggest challenges that they were facing. And time again, those challenges had to do with relationships. Relationships with other people that they now found to be strained and uncertain because of what's happening politically in our country and the ways in which politics is shaping how people treat one another. And so today we are continuing a sermon series. It's called Hold These Truths, Centering Jesus in a Divisive Political Season. This isn't an easy topic to preach and speak about, but I honestly can't think of something that's more timely for us to discuss. Last week, Pastor Matt talked about two myths that we often hear in church when it comes to faith and politics. The first myth is being that Jesus is not political. The second myth being that Jesus is partisan, or that Jesus is more aligned with one of our current political parties than the other. And again, these are myths. That does not mean they are real myths. But the truth that we want to offer to you is that we believe that Jesus is political, but that Jesus is not partisan. So last week's sermon ended with a warning about a very real danger that our politics currently presents to our relationships. The fact is, when we are willing to bend and break and try to align Jesus or God's will with one political party or candidate, something begins to happen that I think can pull us into some pretty terrifying new territory. We begin to see those that we politically disagree with not as people to debate, but as enemies to defeat and even destroy. Now, just this past week, I was watching the news and I heard something said at a rally for the former president, and it captures pretty succinctly what I'm talking about. I want you to watch this video.
This is no longer a fight between Republican versus Democrat, left versus right. It is good versus evil. And good is going to win this battle, ladies and gentlemen.
So this is the framework. It's not Republicans versus Democrats. It's not left versus right. It is foundationally a battle of good versus evil. That's a pretty huge statement. And if you believe that, do you feel how the ground just sort of shifts underneath you when it comes to this political season? To no longer have people that you disagree with politically, but enemies that are seeking to unthrone good itself? Now, I want to be clear about something. This move that was made there is not exclusive to the political right. It's not only Republicans or conservatives that are doing this. That became clear to me when former President Trump was shot at, because the response from many on the political left was not concerned that a human being could have been killed, but rather memes and statements that actually made me profoundly sad. They made light of the attempt on his life and wondered why the shooter didn't have better aim. As soon as we proclaim someone else to be evil, it makes it far too easy for us to justify incredibly bad behavior toward them. We become okay with defaming them, with anger and lying and cheating and stealing and gossip and even violence toward them. It's a classic example of the ends justifying the means. And again, this has become a disturbing problem across the political spectrum. And as many of you know all too well, that has even trickled down into our everyday relationships. Because of the current state of politics, family, friends, coworkers, acquaintances that we used to get along with just fine, even though we had differences in opinion, because of what's happening, because of this shift, we now barely want to talk with them or even be in relationship with them at all. I'd say that the current state of politics threatens our relationships. So today I want to talk about how politics impacts those relationships and how we can be called by Jesus to intentionally connect with other people, especially in this tense environment that we're in. And now, this isn't so much about extreme examples of tension in our lives. Instead, I want to talk with you about practical things, the tools for everyday life, everyday engagements. And I'm going to offer you 3 rules for life, 3 ways that we can live as followers of Jesus in a divisive political season. And these are 3 rules I'm going to share with you. I'll be honest, they're not mine. I didn't make them up. They come from the writings of a man named John Wesley, who was one of the co-founders of the Methodist movement. What I really appreciate about Wesley was that he was deeply concerned with people not just believing in Jesus, but actually living the way of Jesus out in their everyday lives. And this is important because it was Jesus who said that you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your being, with all your mind. This is the first and the greatest commandment. And the second is like it. You must love your neighbor as you love yourself. All of the law and the prophets depend on these 2 commands. That last sentence really drives it home. Pay attention. This is really important. These 3 rules that I'm going to tell you about today are Wesley's way of explaining how we can actually love other people, how we can love our neighbor like ourselves as Jesus tells us to. And they're so simple that they've actually been come to called the 3 simple rules. When you hear them, you're going to understand why they're called that. And if you hear that and you say, I'm feeling a bit dismissive of anything called simple, I just want you to hold on a second. Take this seriously, because I want you to remember that simple does not mean easy. These are Wesley's 3 simple rules, and they offer some really meaningful guidance to us right here and now. They are, number 1, do no harm. Number 2, do good. And number 3, stay in love with God. Let's explore number 1. Do no harm. The first rule is that, do no harm. Maybe that sounds like a bit of a strange place to start. Surely we should start with something like loving other people or serving other people, doing good, right? Something positive. And instead, what Wesley says is the first rule is a statement about what we are not supposed to do. And why is that? If any of you have ever spent time around children, have you ever seen a knockdown, drag-out kid fight? And I mean like a real fight. What's the first thing that adults in that room try to do? They usually get in there and try and break up the fight. Look, stop throwing punches, stop doing harm, stop biting, stop kicking, whatever it is. Before we can get to anything else, first we have to stop doing harm. When we baptize people here at the gathering, the very first question that we ask is, do you renounce the spiritual forces of wickedness? Do you reject the evil powers of this world? Do you repent of your sin? And hopefully the person being baptized says, yes, I do. I do stop. I do want to stop participating in wickedness. I do want to stop propping up evil and oppressive systems that harm other people. I do want to stop sinning. Sometimes we have to start by stopping. The same thing is true when it comes to our politics and when it comes to the way that we treat other people. And I recognize this is a challenge for all of us. And I can say it's a challenge for me as well. I'm a human being. This is a confession about how human I am sometimes. During one of the concerts I went to this past weekend, there's a band called Snapcase that was playing. Friend Ryan's smiling at me over here. He knows. And I got right up in front with a bunch of my old friends. Yes, there's me in a red bandana, looking a bit more red-faced than I normally do. And throughout the set, it was wonderful. It was old friends, 30 years of old friends gathered around me. And we were singing along every word. We were shouting. It was so fun. And when people would want to climb up on stage and then dive off of the stage into the crowd, because that's something that happens at shows I go to, there is a kind of mosh pit etiquette that is understood. And you may say etiquette at this, but it's true. You make eye contact with the person, and you sort of nod at each other. And then you prepare to catch them and lift them up, and then set them down safely so no one gets hurt. It's fun all around. And that works really well. When etiquette is followed, it's great. But then when someone chooses not to follow the rules, it's not so fun. And that happened not just one time, not just twice, but again and again and again. And I just happened to be a relatively tall guy just at the corner of the stage, which is perfect height for what? People running and jumping right into my head and into my shoulder. I still have some wonderfully colored bruises from boots that were landing. And I know this might be hard for you to believe, but something was happening inside of me. Something that really doesn't happen very often. I was getting angrier and angrier, and that's part of why it may be red in the face. I was getting frustrated, but thank God for old friends and people who know you. My buddy Josh King, who I've known since 1994. He came up to me and he said, "Hey, why don't we take a break? Let's go walk over there. We're going to cool down. We're going to let it go. Here's a cold drink of water. You're going to breathe with me. Yes, you're going to relax. You don't need to let your anger lead to something you regret." Again, thank God for old friends. Josh's challenge to me, even in the middle of a mosh pit, is Wesley's first rule. When faced with people that frustrate us, or opinions that we find problematic, or maybe political positions that we just can't stand, or even old friends that we now deeply disagree with, the first rule, it reminds us that we have to start by stopping. We have to start by committing in what we do, what we say, how we respond to not adding to the division and the anger and the extreme fear-mongering language that we are all too familiar with in this political season. So what does this practically look like in different areas of our lives? When it comes, I think, to our online life, to the internet life we have, how we interact with others on social media, the decisions that we make about what we say and what we share, be prepared, this feels probably close to home for some of you. It is important to ask, does what I am saying and doing do harm? Does this distance me from another person? Does it only serve to draw close those people who agree with me and push away those who don't? Does it add to the cynicism and anger that I see? Does it promote something that isn't true or seek only to frighten people? Or even simply, is it just mean? Or how about when it comes to one-on-one conversations with other people? Think about the ways that we engage with others that could regularly do harm, or the language that we use that hurts instead of asking for real communication. I have a lot of different friends across social media, people who stretch across the last 46 years of my life. And thank God there are a lot of different opinions. I think that's actually a rich and beautiful thing when those opinions don't harm other people. Sadly, within the past few months, I've had to let some of those online friendships go. I've had to choose to unfriend or even block some people because the language that they insisted upon using, and this is even after I spoke with them or others spoke with them and said, "Hey, this is really hurtful and harmful. Could we talk about this differently?" They still chose to use it, and it was very cruel and harmful toward other people. Now, I think that relationships can generally withstand heated conversation, even debate over ideas. But the truth is that language that dehumanizes and harms, language that is intentionally cruel, it eats away at relationships like acid. It doesn't help at all. It doesn't encourage each of us to hear each other, to remember each other as human beings. Instead, language like that can break and shatter when the world desperately needs rebuilding. And here's the hardest part. Harm is often defined by the other person. So if someone is regularly telling you that your posts or your language or your behavior is doing harm, don't dismiss them. It's our responsibility to pay attention to that. Don't ignore it. Pray and ask even other people you trust, is this doing harm? we are invited to do no harm. So what would it look like if you were arguing with your spouse or your partner and you responded with this rule in mind? Do no harm. What if with your kids you were careful about whether your words over time build them up or tear them down? What if during a heated conversation with a friend you decided, I'm not going to do any harm? What if in everything that you post on social media, your first principle is that I will not try to diminish or knock down or make fun of other people? What if in the face of even the most frustrating political rhetoric we hear, we start by saying, I will do no harm? The first way that we love others is by doing no harm. The second simple rule is to do good. So not being harmful, it's a good baseline. It's an important place to start. But then we're actually called to do and be something that's the opposite of harmful. Jesus commands us to love, to build up, to positively contribute, to do good when we interact with other people. Dear friend, don't imitate what is bad, but what is good. Whoever practices what is good belongs to God. Whoever practices what is bad has not seen God. Whew. Pay attention to this, because the command is not to be good, but to do good. Not to simply be nice, but to practice what is good. And Wesley's second rule for loving other people is to do good. And what does that mean for us today? In the Gospels, there is this beautiful story about Jesus healing people. And as he was doing that, the followers, the disciples of John the Baptist, they came to him and they watched him for a while and they said, hey, we need to know something. Jesus, are you the Messiah, the one that has been promised, the one we've been looking for, or is it going to be somebody else? Can you just clear it for us? Let us know. And Jesus doesn't give them a simple answer. Of course, he tells them a story. And this is what he says. Go report to John what you've seen and heard. Look around you. Those who are blind are able to see. Those who couldn't walk now can walk. People with skin diseases are cleansed. Those who are deaf can now hear. Those people who were dead have been raised up. And good news is preached to the poor. Happy is anyone who doesn't stumble along the way because of me. Jesus was identified by the good that he did. And so in our everyday interaction with other people, the second rule that we are invited to follow is to do good. To basically, friends, always to be asking ourselves, what good is this behavior of mine doing? What good is my language or my actions producing in the world? In everyday encounters with other people, it is just worth asking, what does it look like to do good? I'm talking about before speaking or engaging or acting, you ask yourself, does this behavior of mine that I'm about to do, will it bring healing? Do my words open up understanding? Do I draw people in? Does what I'm doing or saying encourage other people? Do my words and my actions result in justice and reconciliation and peace? Am I producing good in the world? So on Friday night, Pastor Matt was the keynote speaker at the Bridge Bread Annual Gala. If you're unfamiliar with Bridge Bread, it's a local organization that helps people in need to become bakers. And they learn valuable skills. They transition from housing insecurity to security and to stability. And a few weeks ago, Matt went down and joined the bakers in baking some bread and some other things, and then was able to hear what was happening in their lives through this ministry. And the couple that started it, their names are Fred and Sharon Domke. They saw a lot of problems in our city and in our region, and they were hearing about it all the time from other people as well. Oh, the city's going to hell in a handbasket. Oh my gosh, it's struggling, it's terrible. That's what they were hearing all the time. But instead of joining in the negativity, one day they asked themselves, what can we do to positively contribute instead of just noticing the problems? And the result was Bridge Bread. I think it's so easy for us to rage and to moan about the current state of politics or our country or our city or our communities. We can rage and moan about what's happening online and even in our friendships. The easiest move is always to point out what's wrong and then to get angry and upset about it. If you don't believe me, just listen to political ads or politicians or people who have a public voice. Far too often, we are more than willing to rage and lament what is broken and wrong, but it's always worth asking, what can we do? What can we create? What can we build in order to do good in the world? And sometimes that can look like just being willing to have hard conversations. Sometimes it can look like choosing not to argue with somebody. Sometimes it looks like support or encouragement or advocacy and working for justice. Sometimes it's just being present with another person and listening. Sometimes it's showing curiosity instead of judgment. And sometimes the best is serving other people. But sometimes it can also be just taking care of yourself. You don't have to do everything, but we should do something for the better. Here and now, friends, what good can you do? What good can you offer? What good can you join other people in creating? Richard Rohr is a Christian writer and thinker, and he says something that has always stuck with me. The best criticism of the bad is the practice of the better. It's easy to point out what's wrong, but how are we practicing the better? How are we doing good in the world? And finally, and I think this kind of links them all together, stay in love with God. I ask that Jesus, that Christ, would live in your hearts through faith. And as a result of having strong roots in love, I ask that you will have the power to grasp love's width and length and height and depth together with all believers. It's Paul's letter to the Ephesians. The key to showing love is to be loved. And the best way that we can remember that we are loved, that we're capable of love, is through staying connected with God, who is love. We can't show up in healthy ways for other people when we are not also seeking to be healthy ourselves. It's hard to avoid harm. It's hard to do good if we're not staying connected to God and caring for ourselves, allowing other people to care for us too. This past week, all of the United Methodist pastors in Missouri got together for a training about healthy boundaries. It was a pretty incredible time, actually, partly because it was focused on something that I think all of us didn't expect. Instead of just telling us what we shouldn't be doing, the training was primarily about staying connected to God and taking care of yourself and your relationships. The premise was pretty simple. Look, you serve people better when you're connected to God, when you are centered, when we are at peace in our own spirit. Friends, when we, and I do mean any of us, are tired and scared, insecure, or stressed, it is really hard sometimes to love other people. And this leads me to think about what our current politics does to us. So often, the political game plan appears to be more about making us feel afraid and panicked, pushed to extremes, distrustful than anything else. But so often the political approach appears to be about stoking suspicion and anger toward other people, especially those who are different than us. And so during this intensely political season, when fear and distrust are so often being raised high, rule number 3 is incredibly important. When we are told to be afraid or to be angry, let us first remember who God is and who God created us to be and who is really in control during this wildly chaotic time. For John Wesley, some very practical steps helped him to do this, that helped him to remember to stay in love with God. Worshiping and praying with other people, praying by himself, taking part in supportive groups of people where he could just be honest. I'm going through it. I need some help. Pray for me. But he was also reading the Bible. He was looking for hope and the promise of the better that can be found in its pages. This past weekend, I spoke with a mom of 2 trans kids, and I listened to her story, which includes being estranged from a church that refuses to welcome her and her family. I didn't think I did much. I didn't say anything monumental. I just listened. I tried to assure her, look, I don't think God hates your kids. And they are celebrated. They're loved as they are. And I saw her a day later, and she hugged me. Not just like, hey, what's up? It was a deep hug. It was a holding hug. And she said, thank you. Being heard was so life-giving for me. She hadn't realized how much she needed simply to be honest about her pain and for that honesty to be welcomed by someone else, especially a representative of the church. Simply being heard was centering for her. It was strengthening for her. When we drift from God or we're pushed away from God by other people, we can drift in our ability to feel centered, to know who we are, to feel rooted, to reflect that love. So part of staying connected to God is caring for our own soul and allowing other people to care for us as well. I was reminded in so many ways this past weekend how much I need my friends. Spaces to be honest, to laugh and to cry, not just to listen to other people, to be heard by safe people myself. I also know when I am not taking care of me, when I'm not getting the sleep that I need, or I'm eating terrible foods, or I'm not exercising and I'm not praying, I'm not listening to God, then I do not show up as my best self. In fact, I can fall short in huge, hard ways from being the person that I know myself to be when I'm healthy, when I'm whole and in a good place. On the other hand, when I do have people who are hearing me and seeing me, when I am taking care of myself, when I show up differently in difficult conversations and interactions with difficult people, I find my own emotions to be less overwhelming. I can handle stress and respond differently. I can respond in ways that do good and are not harmful when I'm caring for myself and allowing others to care for me. Practically speaking, sometimes this might look like caring for yourself by not engaging with difficult people. I hope that's a word of freedom for some of you right now. It's okay to not engage in arguments and debate as an act of caring for yourself and staying connected with the peace that God offers to us. The third rule tells us that to love other people, to avoid our own worst instincts, we have to stay connected to the God who is love, who remembers us. We remember who God is, who God created us to be, the God who holds all of us during this season. So the three simple rules, friends: do no harm, do good, stay in love with God. We were talking about this message, all of the pastors, and someone said, look, are these too simple? It's a complex time. Are these rules too simple to meet the moment that we're in? And we thought a lot about that. We talked it through. But then I think about Jesus and his answer to a complicated question. You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all of your being, with all of your mind. For this is the first and the greatest commandment. And the second is like it. You must love your neighbor as you love yourself. All of the law and the prophets, everything else depends upon these two commands. Love God, love other people, love yourself. Everything starts here. Politics so often aims to divide us, to make us scared and disorient us, to induce panic. The antidote then is to remember who we are and whose we are, and what we are called to do and be. So this week, I challenge you, write these three simple rules down. Remember them. In this week, every day, try to do no harm. Hold back from adding to the chaos and the confusion. Try to do good, to find ways to build up instead of tearing down. And number three, to stay in love with God, because we can only reflect and practice what we ourselves are rooted in. Pray with me. Holy Spirit of the living God, we need you all the time, but we need you especially now. We ask that you would move in us to make peace within our mind, to make peace within our heart, within our bodies, within our relationships, that we would be bearers of peace, not by our own strength or our own power, but by your power, Lord. For the glory of Jesus, shape us and use us to share love with other people. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.